Okay, you may bring the jury.
Judge, if I may briefly, I think
Yes, sir.
while they're coming in, we can probably take care of this. We had asked that we be permitted to, after our audio expert testified, to provide a transcript to the jury as the state did in their video presentation. The state has objected to that, and we think that the case law is clear that the transcript can't go back to the jury.
What clear case law are you referring to?
Well, Judge, I would refer you to State v. Winkler.
Yeah, you mentioned that one yesterday.
Yes, sir. And the point is that transcripts can be used at the judge's discretion, but it appears that they can't be used outside of the presence of the defendant unless the judge orders. So it could be used in testimony that's in front of the jury as it's being given, but it couldn't go back to the jury because it's too suggestive. It's in the court's discretion, and if the court is inclined to rule against us using it, we would just ask to make sure that if the court is inclined to admit the defendant's exhibit with the transcript, that also be rejected.
If the court is inclined to admit the defendant's,
Pardon me, the state's, yes, sir, the state's
exhibit video
that has a transcript on it, we would ask that the transcript be redacted before we go back to the jury.
so,
We have no opposition to that, Your Honor.
to what?
If, assuming, of course, that you admit it, that we.
Well, there's an objection to it being admitted, is that correct?
Yes, sir, and I believe the court has not ruled on that objection yet, and hasn't decided, and it's going to make a decision at a future date whether that will be admitted subsequently.
Yeah, well, I don't give swap-off rulings that if the court rules this way on this, then the court rules that way on that. The state wants it in, so there may be a double error. I am not inclined at this point to admit the state's timeline or transcript,
Okay, Your Honor, and
nor the defense's transcript.
I understand, Your Honor, thank you.
All right.
Judge, the defense showed the the state showed the transcript yesterday. Can we show the transcript or no?
I'm not following your reference to what the state showing a transcript. A transcript is a printed copy of something given to the jury to review while listening to testimony. And of course, in Winkler, that was jury requested to be provided a transcript of testimony, not a creation by a third party.
Yes, Your Honor. They referenced another case where there was a 9/11 transcript that the jury had in their possession when they heard testimony. They went back into the jury room, listened to the call, and asked for transcripts again.
And that doesn't establish clear law, as you started out saying the law is clear. It's not clear, and I don't. My view is that transcripts are not provided unless the parties agree as to the content, and not based on trading. If I rule allow one thing, then allow something else.
And Your Honor, I'm sorry if I came across that way. What I'm saying is that the transcripts are not going to be, or the state showed the video with chyrons on it, the letters up on the top of the screen saying what some of the parties said. We would, and we consider that the same thing as a transcript. It's just a moving transcript. We would like to be permitted the same thing, and that is to show it with the transcript, but then not go back to the jury. And if the court doesn't want it to go back to the jury.
Yeah, I think the most impressive case is the State versus Martinez case referred to by the state, the dangers of courts allowing a party's interpretation of transcripts to be given to the jury, particularly where there is an objection.
Thank you, Judge. And we're ready to go.
Yes, sir. You bring the jury. Very good. All right, Mr. Foreman, how's the jury doing?
Oh, they're doing fine.
Very good. All right, your next witness.
The defense calls Grant Fredericks.
You swear affirm the testimony you shall give the court and the jury in the trial in this case to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? I do. Please state your first and last name, and spell your last name loudly and clearly.
My name is Grant Fredericks. It's spelled F-R-E-D-E-R-I-C-K-S.
Sorry, F-R-E?
E-R-I-C-K-S.
Morning, Mr. Fredericks.
Good morning.
What is it that you do?
I'm a forensic video analyst.
And what is a forensic video analyst?
A forensic video analyst is an individual who acquires a certain amount of training and skill, who gets training on equipment, who then assists a trier of fact, either a jury or a judge, to accurately understand the meaning of video images, to ensure that the images are being examined correctly, and then to assist in the understanding of issues related to the video images.
And how long have you been doing this type of work?
About 32 years.
How did you get started in this line?
I have a degree in broadcast communications. My emphasis was on television engineering. I worked in the television industry for about 5 years before joining the Vancouver Police Department in Canada. I began working in forensic video before I was in law enforcement. When I joined the police department, I worked patrol, I worked a major crime section, I was a dog handler, and throughout that time period, I was also responsible for working video in the 80s when the department came across the occasional time when crimes were captured to video. In 1997, I became the lead of the forensic video unit assigned to the Criminal Investigation Division of the Vancouver Police Department. At that time, I was teaching at the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, other law enforcement people who were doing video analysis. In about 2002, I became a contract instructor at the FBI National Academy, and I teach forensic video seminar level presentations to command staff about video. I've been teaching at Quantico since every session. It's called an FBI National Session for a year since 2002. In 2000, I was hired by an American company called Avid Technology to manage their forensic division. Their largest single customer is the U.S. federal government, primarily the military, for imaging purposes for video. And throughout that time period, I have been the lead instructor for an organization called the Law Enforcement and Emergency Services Video Association. It's an international association made up of both private, private sector analysts and public sector, primarily from law enforcement from the U.S., Canada, Asia, parts of Europe. And I ran the National Digital Multimedia Evidence Processing Lab, which is where all the training occurred. I've been running my own company for a number of years, doing forensic video analysis throughout the United States, Canada, Europe, Asia, and the Caribbean, and elsewhere.
Do you have any certifications in this field?
Yes, I'm a certified forensic video analyst. I have to recertify every 3 years. My certification is current.
And who's the certification body for that?
It's the Law Enforcement and Emergency Services Video Association. The acronym is called LEVA, so I'll be referring to it as LEVA from now on.
Have you ever testified in court before?
Yes.
How many times?
Well over 200 times. I kind of keep a running record for my curriculum vitae for court purposes of about 10 years. So the past 10 years, over 150 times. And I don't keep a running record for before that, but well over 200.
And where were these courts located?
All over Canada, in almost most of the states and provinces, provinces and territories. In the United States, in 20-plus states, including here in South Carolina. I've testified in the High Court in the United Kingdom. I've testified in New Zealand, testified throughout in the Caribbean. I don't have a breakdown of each one, but those are the locations.
Have you testified at both state and federal court?
Yes.
And you said you had an occasion to testify in South Carolina in a case?
Yes.
When was that?
Earlier this year.
Earlier this year. And what does your work consist of? In other words, you work exclusively for prosecution, defense, civil plaintiff, civil defendant?
The work that I did here in South Carolina was for the prosecutor in a homicide case, and I was responsible for the video analysis. My company breaks down pretty much 50% criminal defense and prosecution, and then on the civil side, about half for plaintiffs and half for defendants. We try to keep a measured client list, just because it's very important to demonstrate lack of bias, to ensure that we're looking at things from both sides. We do some pro bono work as well, so we try to keep a very even mixture in our office.
Do you have any experience with in-car video recordings?
Yes.
And where did you get that experience?
I'm a co-author of the national standards for in-car video recording systems for law enforcement. I was a consultant to the International Association of Chiefs of Police. It's called the IACP out of Washington, D.C. The IACP, the National Institute of Science and Technology, and the Department of Justice funded about a 6-year research project on standards for in-car video. And we wrote the standards, released them about 3 or 4 years ago. So most of the in-car video manufacturers today adhere to those standards.
And you said that you are certified by LEVA.
Yes.
And do you take any other role at LEVA?
I've been a member of LEVA since 1994, the lead instructor from about 98 to 2012. I was the team leader of the certification committee for about 4 years. I am currently on the curriculum development committee for the certification track for individuals who enter the certification program, either as technicians or as analysts. We're in the middle of a conference this week. I taught on Tuesday, and I had classes scheduled this week that I had to turn over to one of my employees and to another one of our members. So I'm supposed to be teaching today, but I'm here instead.
And, Your Honor, the defense would offer Mr. Grant Fredericks as an expert in forensic video analysis.
Says the state.
I have no questions concerning this.
Right. He's so qualified.
Thank you. Mr. Fredericks, let's talk a little bit more about what video forensic analysis consists of. Are there different phases of things that you do to assist triers of facts, such as this jury, to interpret videos and make a presentation for them that accurately documents what the camera saw at the time?
Yes, the phases are very clear in our training. First of all, we have to understand how the video was produced. Video today is made up of so many different pieces due to what's called compression. Compression is the process of reducing the amount of data that represents an image so it can be stored on a computer and then to play it back. So a compression process is actually a compression and decompression to play it back. All of these systems, and in this particular case, we have an in-car video system from different cars. We have a cell phone video. They all use compression, but different kinds of compression. The camera system in the car is an analog camera. It's an interlaced camera. That means it produces 2 images, but the digital video encoder in the car presents it as 1 image. So it's up to us to make sure that we recover both of those images. So the phases really are to ensure that the images are being accurately recovered in the first instance, and that they're being accurately represented. Because if anything is missing, I can't know how you may perceive the loss of information. If anything is added, I can't know how you may perceive that error, that additional information. So my duty is to do no harm, is to ensure that we have, that I'm presenting exactly what is being recorded to you.
And in order to do that, what are some of the techniques, or what are some of the things you look for in a video presentation? You said that the compression, decompression is very important, correct?
Yes.
And is that sometimes called codec?
Well, yes, codec is compressor, decompressor. Codec is a short term, and it's spelled C-O-D-E-C.
What other factors govern how you dissect a video? For example, is there something about the particular format that makes it important to you?
Yes, well, the formats are really defined by the type of compression that's used. So in both of these cases, the 2 videos that we're looking at, they use what's called MPEG compression, but they do it in a different way. MPEG is Moving Picture Experts Group. It's the standard today for most digital video encoding. Moving Picture Experts Group. But there are so many different levels of MPEG, and it's our duty to ensure that we are decoding the information with the correct decoder. Otherwise, the image will change. The information will change. Most importantly, when we're doing an interpretation of an image, there are pieces of the MPEG encoding in a group of pictures, starting with what we call a reference frame, a complete image, followed by a number of images that are referred to as predictive frames. Their values are dependent on information from the reference frame. So many of the pieces of the predictive frame are not accurate. They're not real. They're a production of the process of trying to reduce data storage. So as the video is played and we go through this group of pictures, the predictive images look backwards in time and compare what's occurring at this moment in time with what occurred previous moment in time, and it borrows information from previous images and displays it. So when we look at video, the motion of a person's hand, for instance, may be in one image in one position, say at the middle of the person's chest. In the next image, it might be a few inches further away. The values that were used in the first image are actually just moved to the new position. So they're calculated, it's called motion vector. So when we look at that information, let's say in a case where there's a stabbing and we look at, does somebody have a knife in their hand? Was the knife dropped, or was the knife actually moved to a new position? How much of the image of the knife is actually real? How much of it is just manufactured by motion vectors? So the interpretation of the video can become very, very complicated depending on the question that is at issue here in the trial. So we have to understand what an iframe is, what a predictive frame is, how compression works, so that we don't make an error in our interpretation and we accurately reproduce the images with all of that in mind.
And did you have a chance to view the testimony of Bill Williams yesterday?
Yes, I did. I read the testimony 2 days ago, and then I was here yesterday.
And I'm going to show you what's been marked for identification as defense exhibit 54. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
As a result of watching the presentation of Mr. Williams yesterday, we asked you to help us with some explanations, correct?
Yes.
And you assembled some slides or some photos to help us do that, correct?
Yes.
And you think that it would assist the jury in understanding the production if you went through those with us?
Yes.
With that in mind, which portion of the presentation were you asked to look at?
From yesterday's testimony, I was asked to examine a demonstrative exhibit that Mr. Williams had created that demonstrated the distance that Officer Slager was from Mr. Scott during the shots fired.
And did you find discrepancies in what was displayed in, say, the native type format or the correct format and the way those should have been displayed?
Yes.
Can you demonstrate for the jury what you found and how you concluded that?
Yes. Thank you. For the record, I have a PDF document that has a number of images that I will go through. At the bottom right-hand corner, there's a number, a slide number. So when I refer to images, I'll be referring to the slide number primarily.
Okay.
Slide number 2 comes from Mr. Williams' exhibit that is referred to as Chapter 3, entitled Establishing Location of Slager and Scott During Shooting. Slide number 67 is directly from his PowerPoint presentation. It depicts a wide view of the images from the Santana camera. As Officer Slager is attempting to pull his gun. In the PowerPoint presentation, I've done a magnification on slide 3 that shows how the settings were done. The setting was to scale the video to stretch it by 133%. The distortion in doing this process stretches the image, and it moves the position of all of the objects away from each other. So it exaggerates the distance between Officer Slager and Mr. Scott. What I've done to do to correct this is I've simply corrected it back to 100% on slide 5. So if I go back between 4 and 5, we can see that the lines that Mr. Williams has placed, he placed on after he had stretched the images to demonstrate their distance, but the corrected image shows a very different picture.
And let me ask you, when you talk about distance, are you talking about physical measurements, or are you talking about perception?
Well, I'm talking about the critical point of doing a presentation, a demonstrative to a trier of fact, is perception is everything. This is the perception of distance. It's misrepresenting the image. So this is purporting something that's not happening. So it doesn't accurately represent what it purports to show. And I've got a number of other slides that I was here yesterday when Mr. Williams invited us to correct this and present it, so we did that last night. And I can show the other ones if you like.
Sure.
So this would be the second slide from Mr. Williams, slide 68, on my slide 6. And then this is the moment identified as the first shot fired. And when I correct it, the perceived distance is much, much less. It's about 133% less. The next slide, slide 69, again identified as the second shot, on slide 8. Slide 9 is the corrected view. The lines that were placed on afterwards are left untouched. It shows the difference in demonstrative distance between the individuals. Slide 70 on my slide 10 shows the approximate position of the third shot, and then the corrected view shows the distance is much less. And I can go through slide 71 and then correcting it. Slide 72, showing the approximate location of the fifth shot, correcting it. 73, slide 73 showing the next event and correcting it. Slide 74 showing what appears to be a very long distance and then correcting it. And things are more accurately represented here. So I can kind of go back and forth. You can see how the stretching changes the perspective.
And as you said, the perspective is very important in a case like this.
Well, accuracy is important, and the perspective is critical to issues when we're dealing with perception of distance. And it's important for the trier of fact to have an accurate representation of what really is happening.
Is there any error induced in a cell phone video by the lens, or does it give an accurate view? What is the focal point? Just explain the difference between a camera lens and a human eye.
Well, every camera lens is going to be different. This camera lens is designed to encode an image by what's called an aspect ratio of 16:9, or it's actually 1.77 to 1. So if you 16 units by 9 units, if you do the math, it equals 1.77 repeated. So that's an aspect ratio for what we kind of see as HD TVs that we have in the courtroom. Yesterday, Mr. Williams referred to it as a 4:3 aspect ratio. That's incorrect. This is a 6:9 aspect ratio, or 6:9 image, which is 1.77 to 1. 4 to 3 is a 1.33 to 1 aspect ratio. It's completely different.
And as you examined other parts of Mr. Williams' presentation, can you tell us a little bit about the in-car video? Describe to us if you have Mr. Officer Slager's in-car video there.
Yes. I've opened up Mr. Williams' timeline that shows the in-car video. I've also opened up the original data from the actual in-car recording. I want to be cautious, Your Honor. I'm aware that you made a ruling about not showing certain information. We can't show certain information, but it's contained on this exhibit, so I want to be cautious not to go afoul of what the court's order was.
And Judge, when I approach the witness, I just want to clarify, at what point in this presentation is that information presented?
Could I, if possible, just unpublish for a moment, so I'm not going to go through? Thank you very much. Okay.
If we could just eliminate any of what you think would be offending.
Thank you. Just take me one moment. I'm fine now. Thank you. I'm set. So what I've done is I have queued Mr. Williams' video up to a point where Officer Slager is about to approach Mr. Scott's car. Yesterday, Mr. Williams testified that that this was a proprietary player, that he was unable to acquire the native files. In certification requirements, both for technicians and for analysts, we do not use proprietary players. We acquire the native data because proprietary players, in almost all cases, alters and changes the information. It removes information, it doesn't display all the information, and so it's not considered best practice. In fact, it's considered poor practice to use a player to display the information. So the L3 Communications provides a mechanism within the player to recover the native files rather than displaying it in the player. This really is simply just for an accident investigator primarily, if there's an accident, to look at things like speed, GPS information, when brakes were activated, because this in-car video system is designed to collect metadata from the car radio. Where is the car at any given moment in time? When was the emergency equipment initiated, the lights and siren, and other information. So it's kind of a metadata-rich environment within the video, or within the player. But from a video perspective, they provide this ability to get both the audio and video out in its native format so we don't make mistakes. What I've done is I've queued up both videos to about the point where Officer Slager is walking toward Mr. Scott's car, and I'm going to just point out a few observations. The player squishes the information, so it squishes it together, makes it shorter. It makes people look different, changes the shape of objects, and it also cuts off, call it cropping, the image, so we're not seeing the entire car that we should see in the original data. But one of the important things it does, I'm just going to go backwards with Mr. Williams' exhibit. I'll go forward until just the right hand, the right finger of Officer Slager's hand is visible in the corner of the image, and I'm going to count the number of images until he gets to the letter N. So we'll count this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In the actual video, I go back to where we first see his finger. Here, I'll count this as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. So there's about twice as many images. Where that really becomes important, well, becomes important in all cases, but where it really becomes important is when we're trying to see objects and identify objects. So if I look at the time, I'll just go forward to where Mr. Scott first gets out of the vehicle and is directed back in. And we see his right hand move upward. I'm pointing to, I'll just magnify this a bit. He's pointing up, he's got an object in his hand, and he's going to raise the object. I'm going to count from when it's just about at the bottom of the window. I'll count how many images it takes to get to the top of the window. And I'm starting at Mr. Williams' time period of 09:35:46. And I'll count from here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I'll just go to that same event in the real video. And I'll count from here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. So all of Mr. Williams' images relating to the in-car video, he's taken half the images out, squished the image, and cut off part of the image. So that's the comparison between the original video and his work product.
And you had a name for extracting all the frames from the original video as opposed to being in the player. What's that called?
Deinterlacing?
Deinterlacing.
Yes.
And is it best practices to deinterlace in-car video when one is trying to analyze any aspect of it?
Yes, first of all, it's a minimum standard in our industry. to recover all of the images and present all of the images. They can be left as interlaced, basically where they're kept together, as long, and you will see that, any motion, you'll see actually you'll see both images presented as one frame. But when we're trying to look at nuanced movement, such as this, then it's best practice to separate them and de-interlace them. But in any event, you have to display all the images, and in his, they're not interlaced. We're just looking at one of the pictures.
And had one more question about the anchor point he used for the graphic yesterday, displaying the shots fired. He said was a frame from the Santana video. Have you looked at the original Santana video?
Yes.
Have you examined it frame by frame?
Yes.
Do you know if there were, you could detect any processing problems with Mr. Williams' presentation of the Santana video?
Yes.
Couple of exhibits that have been marked for identification. Previously, the state's appointed defendant 48, 49. And I'm showing you what's been previously marked for identification as defendants 48 and 49. Do you recognize those?
Yes.
Did you prepare those demonstrations?
Yes.
And what was the purpose of preparation of those demonstrations?
One, Exhibit 48, was to demonstrate the issues with the lack of the incorrect processing of the in-car video, which we've already discussed. This is just kind of another copy of it. Exhibit 49 is a demonstration of Mr. Williams' work product, where he has processed the Santana video using two different tools, Ikena and Synthize. I'm very familiar with Ikena. It's an inappropriate tool to use for this process. It's been over-processed. As a result of that, what's occurred is what's referred to as image blending. It's an artistic method to make images more pleasing to the eye, and that's kind of what Ikena uses it for. For forensic purposes, it alters the meaning of the information. And so I've produced 49 to demonstrate the errors in his production.
And could you publish 49 to the jury? Do you have a electronic copy of that?
I do.
And just explain, I think that's very confusing to me, what you just said. So could you break it down for us so that we understand what the issue is?
Yes. So Ikena does a number of different things, and it's used in different industries. There's not very many people who use Ikena in my industry, but you know, it does certain things depending on what the user wants it to do. But the application of Ikena in this case was incorrect. The image blending, which is how Ikena does its stabilization to make things more pleasing, is not intended to be an accurate process. image blending takes 2 to 3 images, usually 3 images, and it blends their values together. And then when you play the video in a sequence, it stretches one image into another image, and that image into another image. So you get kind of image 1, 2, and 3 as one image 2, 3, and 4 is the next image 4, 5, and 6 is the next image. So it's kind of this linear blending of information. And what you end up getting, if you just watch the video, is it looks more smooth. If you look at the images image by image, you see the artifacts, the errors in the reproduction. And so this exhibit is used to demonstrate that. What I've got is the Santana original video. It's kind of a blurry image, but this is one of many in Mr. Williams' work product, specifically at 093751 on his timeline. I'll actually make this a bit larger, but we can see the exact same image on top. This is Mr. Williams' production from his timeline at the bottom. I've magnified the image without doing any changes apart from making it larger from Mr. Williams' work. And we can see that Mr. Scott's, he's got 2 legs. He's in 2 different positions, and the part of his body is hidden behind the tree. In the original video, obviously he's got 1 leg visible. Officer Slager in Mr. Williams' work is in 2 different positions in this image. And I can just make that a bit larger. Just so we can see, so I've made it a bit larger just with the display here, so we can see that there's more than 1 image combined, and every one of his images in this process is like this. So when you look at it and you're not trained to see this, the layperson would see this video and it would be more pleasing to watch. But forensically, it's very misleading, and that's what we train our analysts to do in LEVA is make sure things are accurate, because we don't know how it may be perceived by a lay jury.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Fredericks. LEVA, the certification organization, can anyone get certification in that organization?
Yes, anybody who is actively involved in this science can apply to enter the program. You can be with public sector or private sector, so anybody who is doing this work for a living can enter the program.
Let's talk a little bit about the work you were asked to do on Officer Slager's behalf. Can you explain what you were given and what you were asked to do with the information?
Well, I was provided with a large number of in-car video systems from the North Charleston Police Department, all the police vehicles that arrived. I was given that video. I was also provided with all the photographs taken at the scene. I was provided with the Santana videos that were recorded by Mr. Santana. I was also provided with the broadcast that was made from the department, from their radio system. And I was asked to align all of those together to get a more full understanding of what's occurring during the events, and then to assist in producing exhibits of the relevant information so that the jury could assess what happened from different perspectives.
And you saw Mr. Williams' timeline presentation yesterday, correct?
Yes.
And is there a difference in the type of work you did to align this and what Mr. Williams did?
Yes, there's some differences. Firstly, the images that were processed to a forensic standard. The time, we have to have a reference to keep things in linear order and to keep the relationship from one camera system to the radio system to another camera system in correct order. All of the in-car video systems have their own date and timestamp. The date and timestamps are not consistent just because it's kind of like my microwave in my kitchen might be different time than your microwave in your kitchen. So what we use for establishing an accurate timestamp is actually the broadcast from the police department. The broadcast comes in two different forms. One, they have what's called a speaking clock. They actually have an encoded timestamp in the video or in the audio recording. So you can listen to just the communication between the dispatch and the cars and the officers, or you can actually turn on the speaking clock and listen to the exact time of day. And that comes from Greenwich Mean Time. It's a computer-generated international timestamp. So using that timestamp, I was able to provide an accurate timeline. The timeline, I'll just show it here. This is my forensic system. This is what a timeline looks like. This is the assets, some of the assets that I was provided from different cars and the audio from different sources, and they are aligned, and I have a timestamp that I have on each of the images for reference purposes. This timestamp is synchronized to the speaking clock. All of the in-car videos are synchronized to the speaking clock. When Mr. Santana is recording the events and Officer Slager makes a broadcast, that broadcast is captured by the dispatch, and it's captured on Mr. Santana's recording. So those are synchronized. So everything is synchronized so we can properly have a linear run time.
So it's much like Mr. Williams' work. You just used a different anchor point for the, to get your base time for this event, correct?
Correct. An anchor point that is referenced by all of the sources, yes.
And tell me again where you got your sources. Where did you get your source for the body mic?
Well, all of the sources were provided to me by the defense, and the reports that came with it came through SLED and through other sources to the defense, and I got them. But the in-car video system has a radio inside the car and a radio on the officer's duty belt, which we saw this morning. That radio transmits information from the duty belt to the radio in the car. Now, by radio, I mean there's a different receiver that's tied to the in-car video system, not the broadcast radio. So they're completely independent. The standard is that these are supposed to transmit audio from the officer's duty belt about 1,000 feet without disruption, provided you have line of sight. If there's buildings in the way, you're going to get a little bit less than 1,000 feet, sometimes substantially less. For whatever reason, the radio on the officer's duty belt, which is the microphone, it's a radio, didn't transmit far enough. So what we get is we get good transmitted communications when the officer is at the car, but once he runs down the roadway and then into that grassy area, we get very few transmissions. There is some carrier based on the radio signal where we're getting little snippets, but that's where we're getting the audio from, and that was provided to me as part of the in-car video recording system in the L3 player.
Okay, and what else, what other information did you provide on your compilation to assist the jury in evaluating the facts and circumstances of this case?
What else I got?
What other information other than just the audio and the video?
I received a report, a TASER report. We work with TASER reports frequently because a lot of incidents that are use of force incidents such as these are TASER is involved in some respects. TASER provides a documentation of the activation of the TASER itself. The body-worn video and audio systems record oftentimes a clicking sound when the TASER is applied, but there's a connection issue, so we sometimes hear a clicking. If we can get a synchronization from the sources, we can synchronize the activation of the TASERs to the video information. The TASER data, just like my microwave, is going to have a different timestamp than the in-car video, but they can be aligned together.
And what did you do to align the taser?
There's a report that provides within its own system that one taser was activated at 0 seconds, and 6.8 seconds later there's another activation. So at least we have a running linear time and record of a reference for the relationship between each taser activation. Within the audio system of both the Santana video and the body-worn video, we could hear a number of the taser activations. We could identify which ones they were and then line them up into the timeline. As a result of that, I provided a graph just a text that says taser. This is synchronized to the taser report and to the audio information we have.
And you said you also incorporated the Santana video into this presentation?
Yes.
Did you do any work to the Santana video before you incorporated it into the presentation?
At first, no. The Santana video is a linear recording event that has a start time that is synchronized to the rest of the timeline. And when Mr. Santana was operating the camera, he's in motion. Camera's also moving. Leaving it in its native form, difficult to watch, but that's how it was added to the system. To make it more visually intelligible, I've rotated it and then done some stabilization. That can be turned on or off, but the assistance of the stabilization helps in visually understanding and following what's occurring.
Explain to the jury what video stabilization is.
The visual stabilization, video stabilization is intended to assist even me, someone who's used to looking at video, to more accurately understand what's occurring. When the camera is shaking and people are moving or the objects are moving around, it's difficult to really perceive all of the actions. Some actions are nuanced. When we lock down a target to one particular part of the image and don't let that target leave that spot, the outside of the image will kind of move around a little bit because sometimes it's at the edge of the image or sometimes it's at the middle of the image, but for our purposes, we'll lock it down. We'll then see things that we didn't perceive before. So we have the ability to perceive a certain amount of motion, but when there's too much motion, we just can't conceive of all the information. So stabilization locks it down to a certain part of the image, and that's done manually. There are a lot of tools out there that can do automated stabilization. They work okay when you have a helicopter that has a certain kind of movement to it. You can stabilize it, lock it down. The movie industry uses it. It's pretty good. If you've got something like a perspective inside a police car that's not really moving that much, you can use an automated manual or automated process that makes it look very good. But anything that is handheld, that's moving around, you end up creating artifacts and errors in a manual process. So unfortunately, I put in an automated process. Unfortunately, this is manual. You have to move every single image, whether there's thousands of them or not, to conform to a certain XY coordinate. Every pixel or picture element is assigned an address. So we push the video over to that one address. Maybe it's the center of somebody's head or a piece of something that's visible on the duty belt, and we'll lock it down. It makes it much more intelligible.
And you do it frame by frame?
Frame by frame, yes.
Does it change the information that's presented or just the format in which it's presented?
Well, it doesn't change the format or the information. It just realigns it so it's easier to see. But it's also done within the context of, let's look at the original recording. We understand what that is. Now let's look at the stabilized version. So we're getting both perspectives, and the stabilized version will be much easier to perceive.
Okay, so you put all of this together in one product, right?
Yes.
And did you do any of the audio engineering on this?
No. I initially did an alignment because the audio and video are pretty much aligned together, so I made sure they were in my system. But I've been working with audio for 30 years. I'm not an audio expert. That's a very different science. Mr. Hallamore did the audio work. He's much more knowledgeable in that area than I am. So I took his work product and embedded it into this timeline.
And just to be clear, the audio that Mr. Hallamore did not include the dispatch audio, did it?
No, the dispatch audio required no processing.
And why is that?
It's very clear. So when Officer Slager, in part, is in the chase, and he makes a broadcast description, I had a choice of whether to use the very, very poor transmission from the body-worn video or the very clear broadcast from his radio, and I used a very clear broadcast.
But those two transmissions lined up on your timeline?
Yes, they're both on the timeline. I just turned one. I listened to both of them. One I could hear clearly, one not so clearly, so I just turned the one off.
Okay. Do you have the files that contain this this video that could be downloaded and provided to the court as an exhibit?
Yes, I've done that. I have them in my forensic system here. I've also got them separated as individual. I'll just refer to them as chapters, but we can go anywhere we need to in either of the productions.
And do you have both of them available? Can you put, we need to submit them to the court. Can we do that now, or do you need a moment to?
Usually it might be best, because I can't anticipate what questions may come up. I'll just keep a kind of a record of what we do show, and then as soon as I'm done, I can make a copy of all of those. If I make a copy now and a question comes up, I may have to get it back and redo the copy. But it's completely up to you. I can make a copy now if you like.
I think let's just keep it clear, and we'll make a copy now, and if questions come up, we'll correct it. And let's just do the chapters first.
Would you like the documents that I've already shown, the exhibits that we've talked about, included?
No, we have those separate.
Okay.
Those have already been marked by this.
I'm making a copy, as you requested, onto a thumb.
Pause it there. Oh, back.
Turn it off. What happens when you trigger it, is it actually has what's called a pre-event time period. In this case, it's set up for 30 seconds, but the agency can set it up for a longer period of time. So when an officer witnesses something, let's say somebody gets into a car accident in front of them, if they go and hit the trigger and they only started with that car accident, they'd actually miss the accident. But within 30 seconds of seeing an incident, somebody goes through a red light or there's an activity in front of them, turn on the emergency equipment, it triggers the recording back 30 seconds. So then they kind of have a historic view, they get the event. In this particular case, when Officer Slager initiated the recording, he did so by turning on his emergency equipment. That automatically triggers the recording back 30 seconds. The audio is the only thing that's not always being recorded. The audio only starts at the trigger point. So we'll actually have about 30 seconds of no audio, and then we have audio.
Okay, let's go ahead and play it.
From the audio or just from the beginning?
Let's just play it from the beginning.
Okay.
And let's pause it there. Back up just a bit. Can you identify the object in front of the Officer Slager's car there?
Yes. The vehicle immediately in front of Officer Slager's car is the vehicle driven by Mr. Scott.
Okay. Let's go ahead and continue. Okay, and stop it again. Did you notice whether the brake lights were illuminated or not?
The two brake lights on the back of the car were illuminated. The third brake light was not illuminated. I can just go back if you like.
Yeah, could you go back, please?
So I'm looking at 9:32:54 and 23 frames. We see the two brake lights on, but the third brake light is not.
Okay, let's continue. And pause it there. Same observation?
Yes.
Okay. All right, let's continue.
Dakota on a.
So the beep that we heard occurs when there's a transmission. So when the officer initiates the broadcast, there's a quick beep, and then we hear the broadcast. And that initial broadcast was about 30 seconds after it was initiated. I'll just go back for a second to the start of that. And then, you'd like me to play it from there?
Yes.
Dakota on a gray color Mercedes, take tag 1318 Golf Golf.
This is Highway 223 at 9:33.
So the broadcast, the response from the communications operator, she confirmed the stop, and then she said 9:33. So she has the same timing device as the speaking clock, which we're going to hear in a minute, but she always gives the time period verbally, so that's a secondary confirmation of the accuracy of the time.
Okay.
Continue. 9:33 and 36 seconds.
So that voice, the British voice, is called the speaking clock. It's GMT speaking clock.